Genesis 25, beginning in verse 24. And when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red, all over like an hairy garment, and they called his name Esau. And after that came his brother out, and his hand took hold on Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 80 years old when she bare them. And the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field, and Jacob was a plain man dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he did eat of his venison, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Now notice that Jacob was born just a few seconds after Esau was born. And as he came out of his mother's womb, he was holding on to the foot of his twin brother. And that is actually why they called him Jacob. Do you realize what that name Jacob means? You may want to jot down in your Bible, maybe off in the margin, circle the word Jacob in verse 26 and put the one who supplants, the one who cheats, the one who defrauds others. How would you like to have that name? I don't think I'd want that name for the rest of my life, being called Jacob. Hello, one that defrauds. Hello, one that constantly cheats and tries to supplant others. Little did Isaac and Rebekah know how he would grow up to exemplify the meaning of his name. They were basically pointing out the fact that as he was born, he came out holding on to Esau's heel, as if he was trying to supplant, cheat his brother even from day one. As we study Jacob's life over the next few weeks, you will see that he was always trying to scheme, and he was trying to figure out how he could come out on top, even if it meant hurting others. He literally at times didn't care about the mass destruction that he created in relationships. As long as he got what he wanted, that was what it was all about. Now, this is not a message on parenting here tonight, okay? But let me give you an observation from verses 27 and 28. Isaac and Rebekah made one of the biggest mistakes that parents can make, and that is to look at their children and to pick favorites. Big mistake. Isaac preferred Esau, the rough, rugged outdoorsman who loved to hunt. Rebekah, on the other hand, preferred Jacob, who seemed to enjoy staying at home and helping her with things around the house. This obvious favoritism that we read about right here in Genesis 25 created what we would call a competitive atmosphere between these two twin boys, and consequently a rivalry developed between them. Now that brings me to the main part of our text for this message. Let's read on in verse 29. Genesis 25, verse 29. And Jacob sawed pottage, and Esau came from the field, and he was faint. And Esau said to Jacob, "Feed me, I pray thee, with that same red pottage, for I am faint." Therefore was his name called Edom. And Jacob said, "Sell me this day thy birthright." And Esau said, "Behold, I am at the point to die, and what profit shall this birthright do to me?" And Jacob said, "Swear to me this day." And he sware unto him, and he sold his birthright unto Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils, and he did eat and drink, and rose up and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Now, before we deal with the subject of selfishness from these verses, let me explain the importance of a birthright. The birthright was a privilege that was normally given to the firstborn of the family. In Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 17, and we're not going to take the time to look at that verse, but if you write it down as a reference, Deuteronomy 21, verse 17, you'll find out that the firstborn was entitled to a double portion of all of the inheritance. But not only did the birthright bestow a double portion of the inheritance, it also gave the firstborn the right to represent the family in all legal, social, and religious dealings in society. And so the firstborn became the one who represented the family. There was an element, we could say, of prestige that came along with the rights here of being the firstborn. The firstborn became the spokesman, the representative in all matters pertaining to the family. And that's what Esau had because he was the firstborn. My point is this: the birthright may not seem like a big deal to you. As you read these verses, you say, what is the big deal about a birthright? Because we don't really deal so much with that today in our culture and society. But it was an extremely big deal in this context and in this culture right here in Genesis chapter 25. Now let me take it one step further, because there was one other very important facet to the birthright, and that was the covenant promise that God had made with Abraham. Remember, Abraham would be Jacob's what? Grandfather. There was Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So the birthright pertained to not only receiving double inheritance, the firstborn received that, but then also they would become the representative or the spokesman in all legal, social, and religious dealings with society. But in this particular case here, dealing with Jacob and Esau, it also pertained to the covenant promise that God had made with Abraham. You say, what is that covenant promise? Go back to Genesis 15. Keep your finger in chapter 25, but go back, if you will, to chapter 15, and let's look at verses 5 through 7. Genesis 15, beginning in verse 5. And he brought him forth abroad and said, look now toward heaven, and tell the stars if thou be able to number them. And he said unto him, so shall thy seed be. And he believed in the Lord. Abraham believed in the Lord, and he counted it to him for righteousness. And he said unto him, I am the Lord that brought thee out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give thee this land to inherit it. Now go to chapter 22. Look at Genesis chapter 22. And look please at verse 15. And the angel of the Lord called unto Abraham out of heaven the second time, and said, by myself have I sworn, saith the Lord, for because thou hast done this thing, and hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, that in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is upon the seashore, and thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies. And in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because thou hast obeyed my voice. Now, here you find the essence of the Abrahamic covenant. In these verses, we see that God promised to make a great nation out of Abraham and his descendants. He would give them land, and through a direct descendant of Abraham, God promised to bless all of the nations. Of course, you and I know that that promise was fulfilled through the coming of the Messiah, Jesus Christ, and his provision of salvation for all humanity through his death on the cross.